July 1943, Germany is about to launch one of the largest tank battles in history, and its newest, most advanced tank is about to make its combat debut. On paper, it's a technical masterpiece, better armor, a devastating gun, slope design copied straight from the enemy's best tank. In practice, over a third of them break down before they even reach the battlefield. This is the story of the Panther, a tank that was, at the same time, one of the best designed vehicles of World War II and one of the most rushed, unreliable disasters to roll off a German production line. This is a story about what happens when a brilliant design meets an impossible deadline. To understand why the Panther exists, you have to go back to the summer of 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, expecting an easy fight. Instead, German tank crews ran into something they weren't prepared for: the T-34. It wasn't just that the T-34 was tough, it was that everything about it made sense in a way German tanks at the time didn't. Its armor was sloped, which meant shells were more likely to glance off instead of punching straight through. Its wide tracks meant it handled mud and snow far better than anything Germany had. And its gun could punch through German armor at ranges where German tanks could barely scratch it back. German commanders were reportedly stunned. There are accounts of officers requesting that captured T-34s simply be copied outright, bolt for bolt. That request was denied, partly out of national pride, partly because German industry wasn't set up to replicate Soviet manufacturing methods, but the message got through loud and clear: Germany needed a new medium tank, and it needed the same core ideas the T-34 had already proven. That project became the Panther. Here's where it gets interesting. The Panther wasn't a copy of the T-34, but it absolutely borrowed its winning formula: sloped frontal armor, a wide track for better ground pressure, and a powerful high-velocity gun. German engineers essentially took what worked about the T-34 and rebuilt it through a distinctly German engineering philosophy: heavier, more precise, more mechanically complex. The result on paper was arguably the best all-around medium tank design of the war. The Panther's 75mm gun, despite the smaller-sounding caliber compared to Allied guns, was actually one of the most effective tank guns in the entire war. Because of its extremely high velocity, it could punch through the frontal armor of a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman's own gun couldn't return the favor. Its sloped 80mm front armor was tough enough that many Allied tank guns simply couldn't penetrate it head-on at normal combat ranges. If the story ended there, this would be a very short, very simple video about a great tank. But it doesn't end there, because Hitler wanted this tank ready for a specific battle, and that deadline broke almost everything good about the design. Hitler had set his sights on a massive offensive at Kursk in 1943, and he specifically delayed the attack twice, partly to make sure enough Panthers were ready in time. The problem: rushing a brand new, mechanically complex tank into mass production in a matter of months is exactly how you end up with a vehicle full of unfixed problems. The Panther's final drive, essentially the gearbox mechanism that transfers power to the tracks, was undersized for how heavy and powerful the tank actually was. It wasn't a minor issue. Crews reported transmissions failing after just a few dozen kilometers of driving, sometimes even less. The engine itself was also prone to catching fire, partly due to fuel leaks around poorly sealed engine compartment gaskets, made worse by rushed wartime manufacturing tolerances. At Kursk, of the roughly 200 Panthers sent into the battle, historical accounts suggest well over half were out of action within the first few days, and a significant portion of those losses had nothing to do with enemy fire. They broke down. Mechanics were, in some cases, more overworked trying to keep Panthers running than the crews were fighting in them. So here's the uncomfortable truth at the center of this tank story. Germany built one of the most tactically dangerous tank designs of the war, and then broke it before it even reached the enemy, purely because of an impossible production timeline. To Germany's credit, They didn't just abandon the design after Kursk, they kept refining it in the middle of an ongoing war, which is a genuinely difficult thing to do well. Later production models, especially the off, A and off, G variants, addressed many of the early reliability nightmares. Improved final drives, better sealing on the engine compartment, and manufacturing refinements gradually brought breakdown rates down significantly. By 1944, the Panther had become considerably more dependable, though it never fully escaped its reputation as a maintenance-heavy vehicle. There's a strange kind of irony here. The tank that was supposed to be Germany's answer to Soviet mass production simplicity ended up being one of its most maintenance-intensive vehicles of the entire war. The T-34 that inspired it could be repaired by a couple of soldiers with basic tools in the field. The Panther, by comparison, often needed specialized parts and trained technicians just to keep running the exact opposite of what you want when you're losing a war of attrition. By the war's later years, Allied and Soviet tank crews had developed genuine respect and fear for a Panther that was actually running and in good mechanical condition. The design itself was never the problem, the timeline was. A few facts worth knowing that don't usually make it into the standard specs breakdown. It was originally supposed to be much lighter. Early design proposals for the Panther were closer to 30 to 35 tons, a genuine medium tank. By the time it entered production, added armor and weapon upgrades had pushed it to around 45 tons, closer to what most other nations classified as a heavy tank. This weight creep is a big part of why the transmission design for a lighter vehicle kept failing. There's a persistent myth that it was a war-winning tank, if only there'd been more of them. In reality, Germany's own tank inspectors were writing internal reports in 1943, flatly criticizing the Panther's reliability as unacceptable for frontline service. This isn't hindsight. Contemporary German officers knew it was a problem in real time. The turret had a notorious weak spot. Despite the strong front hull armor, the turret's cheek area next to the gun mantlet had a shot trap, a curved shape, that could deflect incoming shells downward into the thinner turret roof armor instead of away from the tank entirely. Allied crews eventually figured this out and aimed specifically for it. It briefly fought in disguise. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, a small number of Panthers were disguised with sheet metal and paint to resemble American M10 tank destroyers, intended to slip through American lines as part of a deception operation. It didn't work particularly well. Most were spotted fairly quickly, partly because the disguise didn't account for road wheel and track differences that were immediately obvious up close. This is where a lot of videos on this tank oversimplify things, so let's be precise. The Panther's core design, the gun, the armor sloping, the general layout was genuinely excellent, arguably ahead of most Allied medium tanks of the same period in raw fighting capability. But a tank isn't just a design on paper. It's a machine that needs to start, drive, and keep running long enough to matter, and for a critical stretch of the war, the Panther simply couldn't do that reliably. A brilliant tank sitting broken on the side of a road contributes exactly nothing to a battle. So the honest answer is, it depends which Panther and which year you're talking about. An early production Panther in the summer of 1943 was a liability as often as it was a weapon. A late production Panther in 1944 was one of the most dangerous medium tanks fielded by any nation in the war. Same name, same silhouette, dramatically different reliability, which is a good reminder that spec sheets don't tell the whole story of a weapon's real battlefield performance. The Panther is, in a strange way, a story about impatience. Germany identified a real problem, engineered a genuinely smart solution, and then broke that solution by refusing to give it the time it needed before sending it to war. It's tempting to just call the Panther a great tank, because on paper, it mostly was. But the story underneath the specs, mechanics working around the clock, crews abandoning perfectly good tanks because a gearbox gave out, and generals rushing a masterpiece straight into failure is a far more honest picture of what actually happened. If you want to see the tank on the other side of this story, the one the Panther was built to answer in the first place, let me know in the comments, because the T-34's own story is just as full of surprises.